Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to our UX Insider webinar this evening. Today we're going to cover the topic of how to transition into a creative career in tech. I am very lucky to be joined by two really exciting guests tonight, who I'll introduce in just a minute. But before that, I'm just going to explain a little bit about how you can interact with us during the event. So you'll see you have both a chat box and a questions box. If you can use the chat box just for general introductions, you can tell us a bit about yourself, where you're joining from. But if you have a specific question that you'd like to ask either of our speakers, please just make sure to pop that in the questions box. It just means we can keep track of the questions a little bit better. And also, if you put your question in the questions box, you'll be able to vote for different questions. So if somebody asks something that you're also interested in hearing the answer to, make sure to give it a vote. I'll order the questions by the most votes. So whichever questions have the most number of votes, I'll prioritize those. So make sure to check out the questions box specifically. Okay, so I've already said this, but please do introduce yourself. Tell us what you're working as, where you're viewing the webinar from, and anything else you want to tell us about yourself. But in the meantime, we will introduce ourselves. So my name is Rachel. I'm head of product and research here at the UX Design Institute, and I am joined by Owen and Alexis. So I'll hand over to Owen and Alexis to introduce themselves. Maybe start with yourself, Owen, but thank you to you both for joining us this evening.
Yeah, not at all. Thanks a million, Rachel. So my name's Owen Darby. I work at Workday. I'm a principal UX designer here, and I work on the platform experiences team. So my main area of focus as a UX designer at the moment is human to AI interaction. So defining what sort of human to AI interaction looks like at a platform level, making sure we have hundreds of products here at Workday. So how that interaction sort of persists, and the sort of guidance and best practice across the entire system. So that's me.
Nice. Well, AI is such a hot topic at the moment, so I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions for you on that. But thank you for introducing yourself. Alexis?
Yeah, hi, I'm Alexis. I'm a designer at IKEA, currently in the omni-channel customer experience team. It's quite a mouthful, but I basically look at the end-to-end experience, strategic north bets across multiple touch points. So the app, web, whether it's desktop web, mobile web, the in-store experience, and so on and so forth. So more holistic, high-level thinking, which is really fun. But I'm also very interested in AI, so I have a lot to learn from Owen. Aside from what I do at IKEA, which is basically reimagining life at home for people and planet, I also curate or organize things around climate UX. So if any of you are interested in sustainability, definitely hit me up after. I'm always interested in meeting fellow green-hearted people. I also mentor at the UXDI, just a little disclaimer there so people are aware. But yeah, I used to be an architect. I used to call myself a recovering architect, and I'm very happy to announce that I think I've recovered.
Great. Thank you, Alexis. Sustainability also a really hot topic at the moment, so I'm sure there will be lots of questions on that. But thank you both for joining us, and yeah, we'll jump in. Just to mention to anybody, if this is your first webinar, we are the UX Design Institute. We are a global leader in UX education and certification, and we offer university credit-rated courses in a range of topics covering UX, UI, product design, content design, user research, and lots of other courses too. So just to mention as well, we currently have an early bird offer on our courses. We'll share some details on that in the chat. But yeah, that's who we are. Okay, so that is all that I had to present. So I'm gonna stop sharing these slides now, and we'll jump into talking about transitioning into tech. So I guess what we're going to talk about first is just creative career paths within tech. So beyond coding and software, which is what a lot of people associate initially when they think of the tech industry. So we want to focus on the more creative roles. So to start us off, I'd love to kind of hear from you both in, for our audience, maybe you could explain a little bit about what is UX design and why is it so significant in the tech field specifically. So I don't know if either of you feel particularly passionate about answering this one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, the really the thing that draws me to design, UX design in particular in this space, and I think also the reason it's so important, is that human-centered design, which is UX or user-centered design, is innovation really inspired by people, and that's what that means to me. And I think for me that's a hugely transferable sort of idea across different creative disciplines. If like Alexis, you have been an architect, or like me, you've worked in motion graphics and filmmaking at some point, then that inspiration to kind of create something human-centered is really important to me as a designer, but thankfully very important to the company I work for as well, is that we're creating solutions that are organized around the people who use the software that we're organizing. So, yeah, we've all used bad software. Sadly, it's far too frequent a thing in our lives, and we can all point to a moment in time where we've used an app or a website that just falls way short of what we would expect from it. And for me, UX design is that ability to create something that's inspired by talking to people and learning about what they want from an experience. So yeah, and it's usually important to tech. So I don't know, Alexis, what do you think? If you're with your background as an architect, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's in the name, right? Experience. And I think that's something that I've sort of learned again and again, that there are different lenses to it, but the core of it all is the thing that you're interacting with, the experience that you have while interacting with it. Is it intuitive? Is it effective? Is it getting you to do the thing that you wanted to do in the first place? Is it enjoyable to use? And these things are important when you think about the UX of a certain product or a certain service. Without it, it's very dry, very mechanical, very cold. And that's why I feel quite confident about this field, whatever it'll be called, however we rename it, however we want to structure it and change the landscape. But the essence of it, thinking about how you interact with things, what you feel, what people feel when you interact with it, that doesn't really go away. And actually, I feel quite confident that UX will only evolve and it'll start to be more and more rich, because digital products are getting more and more complex each day. I mean, look at how AI has completely changed the way people use their phones, how they search for things. You have things like Perplexity where you use an AI search machine. But it's not just the potentials of tech with UX, you also mitigate the harms. So the bare minimum, the bar we have to hit is that things have to be usable, right? You have to achieve things. So if you're using a banking app, you need to be able to do your banking. But the harms of it, that's the part where I don't think people talk about enough with UX design. You're mitigating harm, you're ensuring trust, you're making sure it's a safe experience. And I think that's what I find most interesting. It's so many layers, because you're talking about people at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that's what draws me to it as well, is this idea that at its heart, UX design is empathetic. Like, it begins from a really deep understanding of human need, and like, without that understanding, it's really hard to see or feel or experience something. It becomes a kind of a pointless task, right? Yeah. And I think for me, in terms of my own transition, where coming from sort of focusing more on the visual design side of things, motion graphics, visual effects, that side of things, I needed more meaning to my work. And I think that's why I was drawn to user experience. And beyond that, I think some of the other things that you're able to bring with you in those creative fields, apart from thinking about being empathetic, which I think we do by default as creative people, is that, design is largely a collaborative exercise. Like, it's this idea that several great minds are always stronger than one. And human-centered design really benefits from the views of multiple different perspectives, right? We have lots of different roles, as I think Rachel was pointing to there, that are creative beyond just coding and software development, which are very important. In case anybody's from a coding background is going to come looking for me after this, they are really, really, really important. And I think that that creativity from multiple perspectives really bolsters your ability to be able to create something really great. So for me, that's a huge point, is that collaboration that we have. And I think as creative people, regardless of which field you work in now, if you're looking to make a jump, that's one of the parallels that I see in our work all the time, and I think is hugely transferable and very, very important. And that's not I had to go to college for 6 years to learn that. Like you learn by doing that with other people. Totally.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for that explanation. I think what I'm struck by, and probably anybody who's coming to this maybe not knowing much about UX design, but how often you both referenced people or empathy or understanding, those kind of words, which may not be the type of thing you immediately associate with a role in tech. And as you said, Owen, there are, software coding, they are fundamental to our world and to how things operate. It's just that that's a skill set that doesn't suit everybody, or it doesn't suit everybody's strengths. But thank you. I think that's hopefully given everybody a good understanding. I have a stat here that I came across recently, which is from the World Economic Forum. So they have a Future of Jobs report that they ran in 2023. And design and user experience is one of the top 10 priority skills for businesses. They're predicting between 23 and 2027. And it just kind of made me want to ask, I know we understand why UX design is so important, but why do you think businesses are starting to understand that too? Or what has prompted them to kind of realize how important this designing for the user is?
I can take that one first, just because I work at IKEA. You see it a lot, right? When you interact with a business, you're not interacting. It's not about the tech. The tech is there to help you get something done or get to a endpoint quicker, with less effort, with less friction. It's supposed to aid you. So what happens now, especially with the boom of AI, and you can see this with companies sort of rushing to add AI to their products, when they don't start from the why and they don't look at it from a customer-centric or a user-centric perspective, you end up with this tool that is great. It's really impressive as a piece of technology, but it just misses the mark. It's not helping someone achieve their goal. And an example of this is like the customer support field. It used to be people, and think about the times that you've actually contacted customer support. It's always when something goes wrong, when you're really frustrated, when it could be money on the line, it could be a lot of different reasons. And if you come up to a bot that doesn't quite empathize, it's really frustrating. So the differentiation there is the experience, right? And you can still have the AI agents, you can still have the bots, but how and when do you escalate to a person? What part of their experience do you think? All of this is part of the user experience, right? You're looking at the totality of that journey. So it's not just one individual moment, but it's how does everything flow? So I think that's why it makes a big differences with business, especially customer-facing ones.
Yeah, yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think just from a fundamental, like outside of creativity, like from a business point of view, UX, I think, answers a huge question for a lot of people in terms of market fit. Like how do I make something that's really unique? How do I create something that is solving a unique problem? And from a commercial point of view, if you're building a company, if you have no distinguishable difference to your competitors, I think you're going to be wiped out pretty quickly, right? And there's this description of really effective businesses building a moat around their business, being able to sort of say, we do this in a really unique way that nobody else does. And for me, user experience, especially when you're thinking about things like when you're thinking about artificial intelligence, the main discernible difference between you and something like ChatGPT, which has just been like generalized to everybody, is going to be how you interpret that user need. And that can be a very unique and powerful competitive advantage, I think, for a lot of businesses. I think the other thing I'd say is that I think from a design point of view, one of the other things that's completely transferable, and again is of huge value to businesses, is this really optimistic kind of fundamental belief within design that, like, no matter how big the challenge is, no matter how little time or how small a budget you have, or what constraints might exist, designing can be a really powerful antidote to a lot of problems that businesses can't resolve in any other way. And I think for me, that's the most meaningful part of it,
Yeah. Okay, great. And I think, as you're both talking, you're kind of touching on, I guess, the various different roles, because UX design is kind of like, I guess, the umbrella term for what we're talking about, but there's lots of different roles within that. And I guess for anybody kind of, again, new to the industry, could either of you speak a little bit about whether it's the people you work with within UX design, the different types of roles that exist there, or whether it's just from your own knowledge? Owen, I can see you nodding along to that, so maybe you can kick off.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this goes back to the point I was making earlier about collaboration, right? And the multiple different perspectives that you get inside of UX design. Certainly at Workday, we include research, so research with users, with making sure we understand exactly what they need. We also have analytics and data, and data science as part of that, and also design. So you've got within design, you folks doing stuff like content design. So that would have been called content strategy a few years ago. So how do we make sure we're presenting the written word in the right way and designing an experience with the right intent. And then we also have visual design, which is people who focus very, very strongly on a scalable kind of visual design styling. And then we have interaction designers of varying different levels, from sort of a junior or somebody who's just starting off, all the way through to sort of principals or senior principals who would be looking at sort of a platform level across multiple different products. And in the mix with all of that is operations folks. Like, there's all sorts of stuff going on. So big, wide sort of gamut of different kinds of design.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I would say even it's there's something for everyone, right? Especially if you work in one of the bigger organizations, there's a niche, like niches you can't even imagine, and they exist. Someone working exclusively on this tiny thing where you thought is unimportant, micro interactions, that's a whole, motion designers, that's a whole thing. So what I get a lot from people when they are thinking about pivoting and are thinking about transitioning within the creative field is, where do I start? Is UX design right for me? Should I go into UI? Should I do product design, which is UX UI? There's no perfect answer. The only thing you can do is try it out in whatever capacity you can, whether that's taking on little jobs, whether it's doing a course, whether it's watching a video. But exposure will really help you, because it's one of these nascent fields that isn't set in stone. Titles are changing all the time. The scope is changing all the time. The focus, the trends, the hypes, that changes all the time. So you just have to feel it and then see what do you want to do?
Yeah. And I think, again, like that for me brings up another big transferable sort of theme from other creative fields into this one, which is like, we think about that diversity of all of those different roles and trying something out. It's the fact that UX design is hugely experimental, right? Like, if we can't expect perfection from the start, and nobody does. So I mean, that makes it really hard to take risks and limits the possibilities of really kind of big change. So I think what you'll find in UX design or human-centered design, it's all about experimenting and learning by doing. And I think that's a huge theme. As if you decide to take your career in this direction, you like experimenting, you like playing around, starting small and building it big. Going wide and then, figuring out afterwards, that is, you're in the right game.
Hmm. Okay, great. Well, thank you both. I think that's, hopefully a inspiring kind of answer and exciting, I guess, for people thinking about making this career switch. I'm going to move on now to our next topic, which is really looking at career switching. And, we at the UX Design Institute ran a report earlier this year, and we found that 76% of the UX professionals we surveyed are career switchers. So they've come to UX from a previous career. And I know, Alexis, you mentioned coming from architecture. I know, and you mentioned kind of motion graphics, I think it was. And I guess, why do you think that UX is such an appealing industry for career switchers, or for people looking to make a change in what they're working at?
I can take this one. I think it's UX, especially UX design. I think it's foundational. Personally, I think it's really difficult to do all the other facets well if you don't fundamentally understand why you're doing it. You don't understand the person you're designing, the users you're designing for, the groups you're designing for. You don't understand how to think about use cases and scenarios and to abstract these things. So I think UX it's popular because it sort of hits this thing in the back of your head where it's logical, but it's also about emotions. It's also about feelings. It's this dichotomy of like percepting something and being intuitive. It's got, for me, it's just this magical sweet spot. And then once you have that down, there are so many avenues you can go into where UX would only strengthen all your other explorations, right? You could be an amazing visual designer if you understand how people experience and perceive and what they need, and your tool is then visual design to achieve that. So personally, I think that's why I did it. And a lot of people I speak to, a lot of the mentees that I have, they're attracted to that as well. It's this mix of, arts and science and something you can't explain.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the thing that I find really inspiring is that the curiosity that comes with it is your propellant. Like, that is the thing that will move your ideas and the thing that you're designing forward. And I think the nice thing about design for me is UX design that I didn't necessarily have previously that really attracted to me. The UX design became really attractive because I could see that problem solving in this arena has a process, right? Like, there is a process to, it's not a complete unknown. I think a lot of the time with graphic design, it's more about like, I kind of want to have this, evoke this feeling, or like, and I'm just going to play around with loads of typefaces and color and, I'm trying to get to that feeling. It's more the artistic side of things. What I like about it is that you're able to have a balance of sort of the, as Alexis was pointing there, the art and the science. You're sort of understanding how people want something by watching and seeing and listening and hearing what the problem is, understanding that, and then transferring that and making something real as a result of that. So that design process helps us build really deep empathy with the people we're designing for as we understand the problem. And I think that's the main thing that attracts me to it. It's not, although I love the artistic endeavor of just creating stuff for the sake of it, and that's beautiful and sort of generative and really nice, I think this is a slightly different thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously a core part of my role is research, and over the last couple of years I've spoken to probably hundreds at this stage of aspiring UX designers or people who have recently moved into UX design. And the two things they always mention is exactly what you both just said there. So Alexis, to your point, it's often how they describe it is like this light bulb moment that this career exists that brings together those different elements. And it's kind of like they have this moment of, oh, I could actually work in this. It's not just an interest. And then, Owen, to your point, a lot of people who switch to UX design may come from graphic design or something similar, and they just love that more, I guess, exactly as you said, kind of having a process or not a right and wrong exactly, but kind of like guidelines for why we do what we do and why something is bad UX or good UX, and just having kind of a clear process there to guide them. So
Yeah, and that, Rachel, is the health warning that we have to have for UX designers. Once you see bad UX or bad design, you will become eternally grumpy. That is the only health warning that is because once you discover that the universality of like designing for humans, you see bad design everywhere, and you have to live with that for the rest of your life. So just that's the watch out.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is, and so does everybody around you, because you can't stop but point it out. Yeah. But I guess that kind of brings me on to my next question, because I did mention there that a lot of people we see switch to UX design. It might be graphic designers, things like that. But increasingly over the last couple of years, we've seen people come from totally diverse backgrounds with zero experience in the field. And a couple of questions that I can see popping up in the chat is, how can you actually successfully transition, maybe when job requirements are talking about 5 to 10 years experience, even for lower level roles, or when there's, one person saying here 1,000 applicants and only one job going, or, you're competing against more experienced people. Would you, either of you, have any advice, I guess, for those people on how can you stand out and how can you be successful in this transition?
I think for me, Rachel, one of the things that I've found really successful is pointing like authentically to your difference. As strange as it sounds, maybe we need to make sure I have my portfolio looking like everybody else's, or I need to make sure that I have all these boxes ticked. We recently, in the last couple of years, designers who worked in like designing film sets, right? Who came on board, and their visual design skill is obviously amazing because they're having to invent all of these, like every different film has a different look, right? And that's a little bit like there's a parallel between that and a lot of the design work they're doing, right? They have to invent these completely different visual worlds every time we come up with something that cohere to a particular theme. So that for us was like a moment of curiosity about, does this person have a really interesting, open mind that allows them to throw a huge, big net over a problem that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do with somebody who's just gone a very traditional path of like, I went straight to college, straight into UX design, did an interaction masters, and then went, interaction design or something like that. I think pointing to that difference is super important if we're going to think about big problems and how we solve them. Experts are great at like narrow approaches to a problem, but when we get to super creative thinking, we need like big, broad, open minds to sort of solve those problems that we haven't solved yet.
Yeah. And just to add to your point, Owen, I think like something we would see a lot or hear people talk about a lot is, rather than kind of maximize on those differences or maybe a different background, people tend to try and almost scrub it out of their CV. And in doing so, kind of erase the personality that they have that differentiates them. And like you say, then CVs or portfolios can look quite similar. Whereas really, because this industry is so person-centered, there is a genuine transferable skill set there that exists, that really people can draw on from any type of background. We see teachers, taxi drivers, lots of different backgrounds coming through and being successful because they find that connection between what they've done before and what UX requires. Alexis, do you have anything to add to this one? What would your advice be for those people kind of looking to break into the industry right now?
I think years of experience is a tricky topic because it's a real filter that the hiring team has. But I think it's important to understand why they have that filter. Often it's because, as you said, there are thousands of applicants. You need some way to make it doable, to sift through everything. And years of experience is one of the easier markers to use. But I wouldn't be deterred by it because often it's just a way for people to group things, to make sense of huge amounts of information, right? So it's about understanding the intent. And it's also what I've noticed from mentees is that when they talk about interviewing for a job role, they have this dream role defined, and I want to work at Meta or Netflix or Google, and I want to do this type of work, and that's a dream role. But what they don't often, or what they often miss, is like, if you have a dream role and you have where you are now, what are the intermediate steps in between? What's 10% of your dream role? What's 20% of your dream role? What are those things? And rather than thinking about roles that you want to get into, index for areas of growth. So what is it that you want to learn in your next role? Do you want to try a lot of different things? And maybe you should look at startups, because that's where you can put on many hats. Are you trying to learn from other people because you're not very confident? Then look for bigger teams. Is it, where have you worked before? Do you come from an industry of service or customer service or retail? Then look at the retail industry. All these different industries, like, the benefit of tech is that literally everyone is digitizing. Even your corner store, your coffee place, your bakery, they all have apps now. Your yoga place has an app. So don't be too put off by years of experience. It's just a marker. And if you don't get one, go for the next one. But instead of like spray and pray, because that's a tactic that a lot of people use, be super intentional. Like, understand what it is you want to get out of your job. Why are you switching careers? And if I could, I think the reason why I was quite lucky and the transition was quite smooth is I was really clear about why I was switching. So I was really clear about what I was missing or what I was unhappy with in architecture. And I was really clear about what I wanted next, even before I found UX design. And it just so happened that UX fit the bill. I didn't even know UX existed, to be honest. It's new to me. So yeah, be super clear about what you want. It's a good moment. You're already transitioning. You're putting in all the effort. Why waste another career?
Yeah, and I think, Alexis, what you've said there, I really liked the word intentional, because I think that is a really good point, because having been on the other side, on the hiring side, and, I totally empathize that breaking into the industry sometimes can be difficult, but you can tell the difference between a very intentional application and one that maybe is just part of hundreds of applications out. And, I've personally hired somebody with no experience over somebody with more experience because they put more effort into the application. So I think that does play a role.
Yeah, and I'd say the other thing as well, that obviously you need some foundational training. There's no point trying to go into UX if you don't understand interaction design. That's not a good idea, right? But I do think in your portfolio, or the way you present yourself, you can talk about the fact that understanding people is at the center of design, and the fact that from your perspective, in your background, with your experience, how you understand the people you're trying to reach and designing from their perspective means that you can arrive at really, really unexpected answers or really unexpected solutions. So you'll come up with ideas that users will really embrace if you do that. And I think that's universal. That goes across so many different industries and perspectives. If you can present that as your focus, you're much more likely to get hired, rather than trying to make yourself look like everybody else. It's what does your unique perspective plus an understanding of human behavior mean for your ability to design?
Yeah, definitely. I have a couple of stats here that might be interesting for the audience. Again, it comes from our State of UX hiring report that we did earlier this year, but we asked hiring managers what the most important skills they would look for in an entry-level UX designer would be. And the top three were problem solving, empathy, and teamwork and collaboration. And those three are above things like UI and visual design, wireframing and prototyping, research skills. So these are genuinely the skills that managers are interested in seeing. And when we spoke qualitatively to some of these managers, what they explained was that the hard skills can be taught. It's much harder to teach something, empathy or communication or teamwork, if it's not already kind of comes naturally to you, I guess. I'm not saying it can't be learned, but you're kind of off to a good start. And they're skills that anyone who's worked anywhere could have developed. They're not specific to UX. So we've talked about the more transferable skills, but this talk of skills and coding in particular has prompted a question from one of our viewers asking how important coding is for UX. And this is a question we get asked a lot. So I think all three of us can probably weigh in on this one, but I will ask you both as experts, how important are basic coding skills for UX designers?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the question is probably better framed as like foundational kind of computer science. I think is important to have, like understanding how an API works, or understanding how pages render in a browser, understanding the sort of foundational technology that's driving the experience you're making is going to be important, right? And I don't think you're going to be able to design effectively. My own opinion is like, unless you have some understanding about how the internet works, how technology works, beyond like just some, like I've used apps before, or I've used a website. I think unless you have a curiosity about, pulling things apart and seeing how they work, it's going to be difficult. Should people code? I've seen like such a wide gamut of different experiences there for people, like folks I work with who will probably prefer to code than use Figma, right? And that's their way of doing it. But I think to the theme of like this entire talk, like the diversity of that experience is so wide in so many different companies. I think if you're going into a startup, it's probably going to be a whole lot of help, right? Because you're going to be able to get something built really, really quickly. Bigger team, probably less need for it because you've got pretty huge like development teams behind it who are not going to thank you for messing around with like a hobbyist approach to like code, but you can use it to get your ideas across. So I would say like more interesting to folks is a demonstration in your interview that you understand the foundational sort of elements of computer science.
Yeah, that's a great one. Foundational, I think, is the key, right? And to the person that asked that question, I guess my question back is, do you want to learn how to code? Like, is that an area that interests you? If it isn't, then maybe it's not the thing, just an understanding is enough. And I like to give the analogy of architects. As an architect, you don't necessarily need to build the building, but you do need to understand materials. You need to understand, you have some grasp of physics, hopefully, because otherwise the building falls apart. It just collapses. You do need to understand how lighting works and how the like mechanical and engineering system of a building is. You don't have to understand it to its core, but you need to know how all the pieces fit together. And I think that's, if you're the kind of person that is curious, you're naturally gravitating towards how things fit together. What is this piece in the context of a larger piece, in the context of a larger piece? And that's where, instead of thinking about should I learn how to code, is what do I need to understand to be able to give our target group the experience that they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well
yeah. I think you've both answered that question really nicely. And I think it goes back to kind of what you've both said is like, what's the root kind of rationale for it? Like, as Alexis, you asked, do you want to learn how to code, or is it more to help you be a better designer? And we actually did a lot of research on this a couple of years ago while we were developing a course in this area, which is really about understanding the fundamentals of software and coding, but with the prime goal of helping you be able to work with developers. So essentially being able to speak their language so you can communicate. And like you said, Alexis, I love that analogy between the architecture. You do need to know some basics to be able to speak to it, or, not to make totally fundamental physics issues. But yeah, I think you both provided a really strong answer there that hopefully can give some guidance to anybody wondering about that, because it is a question we get quite a lot. So hopefully that's helped people. Okay, I'm going to move us on then to our next topic, which is kind of back to looking at the UX market. And it's no secret that UX has had its ups and downs over the last couple of years. but that we're really seeing more kind of positive trends emerging again. And while there were layoffs within the tech industry in general, UX has kind of broken out of just being a tech industry thing. It's in healthcare, it's in finance, it's everywhere really. So I guess I'd love to know both of your perspectives on the future of UX and how you feel about the future of UX, where you think it's going. If you were in the position of people who are viewing this webinar right now, maybe weighing up, should I make this move? Should I not? What would you say about this kind of industry and its future?
Yeah, I think it's a great point you make there, Rachel, about how wide design is as a discipline. So don't be put off if you're just looking inside tech companies. I would widen your scope a little bit, and I do think, certainly from my point of view, one of the big skill sets that's I would say in demand and not particularly well understood, even amongst folks who've been doing it for a long time, is human to AI interaction. So I would say that is a big area where you can have a look and learn a lot in that area, and see if you develop a curiosity about that in particular. I think that's a big. If I was thinking, I want to become a designer or a very senior designer in 5 years' time, it's hard to see how you would be doing that without a fundamental understanding of sort of some of those big paradigm shifts in interaction design. And I think getting curious about those are going to really help you accelerate your career. At the moment, there's always talk about the fifth AI winter. We've gone through AI 4 or 5 times now, and it always kind of gets blown up and then falls on its face. That may happen, but I think fundamentally, that understanding about how human cognitive needs kind of map to large language models and their capabilities is something to get super curious about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great advice.
And I think you should look at it as a tool, right? AI is a piece of technology. And if you want to be designing the experience of technology, you need to understand the technology. So it's, again, I think the thing that will help you sort of find your place in this field, if it's something you're interested in, is really being driven by that curiosity, having that appetite to learn and wanting to learn about new things. I don't think that it's going away anytime soon, UX design. And I actually think because of the AI hype and certain places over-indexing on technology, we'll start to see bubbles of anti-AI. And you're seeing it already. People are resisting it. But within those spaces, also different types of design starts to grow. Service design is a big one. We're thinking about all these other areas outside of tech, retail, banking, healthcare. All of these require thinking about the service. It requires thinking about that in-between space between digital and physical. If you have a cashier and a kiosk and your phone and you're in the bank itself, how does that all interact? So whether UX design as a title will exist, no idea, because it changes every day. Now it's product design, it'll be something else. Who knows? My title has product UX design because they couldn't decide. So you really don't know, but at its core, the essence of designing for people, the essence of designing for experiences, that won't go away.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to try and leave about 10 minutes at the end just to go through some more of the questions. But before we do that, I'm going to just cover one more topic just briefly, and that is kind of something we've touched on already, but it's around the importance of having an education in UX. And I guess, Owen, you kind of touched on it earlier, saying that there is, a foundational knowledge that you have to have, and of course the soft skills are important, but really you'd want to be pairing them with a solid foundation in UX. Could you talk maybe a little bit to maybe from your perspective as a person who hires, or, why is that so important? Why is some kind of UX qualification or education kind of a helpful thing to have?
Yeah, I think part of it is the when I first started into design, UX design, there wasn't a huge like body of knowledge around it, right? I think we're in a different place now where we have a huge amount of sort of free, like inexpensive sort of resources online. I think that comes with its own challenges, right? Where you have a very uncurated slew of content for people to go through. And I think it's very easy to start feeling after you sort of dipped into all of these free courses that like you have a really, really, really good understanding, right? I think where you start to see that difference is where somebody has gone out of their way to really understand the fundamentals, and they've been brought through those fundamentals with like an explanation about the implication for a piece of design, and understanding what a foundational principle means when you apply it to a particular problem. And I feel like that's where a lot of the stuff that we really look for is like, we give you a design challenge, no amount of like free online bootcamp stuff is going to help you solve that. Like you're going to have experience of having played that out in some sort of real world scenario a few times before you can adequately sort of explain that, I think. And so, you know, that's the really like a credible industry focused education, I think, is really important for getting those like up-to-date knowledge and things that are important to employers.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Owen.
And you have to look at like UX design and this field. It is for a business. You're not just a UX designer or an organization. And businesses and organizations have missions, they have visions, they have goals. They have to hit certain targets. So if the hiring manager is looking at a bunch of applications, personally, I have prioritized people who have at least some basic knowledge, because I don't really have time to teach. By the time you have a role that you can put up to get applicants in, that's probably it's already yesterday. You needed to hire the person yesterday. So you're really looking for what kind of person would work well with my team, and can they hit the ground running? And when I say hit the ground running, it's not understanding perfectly how this company works and I execute as though I've been here for 10 years, but it's, do you have something to fall back on? So if you get stuck and you freeze, like what's your basic process? And that's where the UX design process that Owen brought up earlier, that's so important, and it's so fundamental to our area of work, because there is a reason why you do research first. There is a reason why there is a space for analysis and synthesis. There is a reason why design doesn't come till the very end of the process, and we spend a lot of time in the problem space. So think about it that way. It's not so much that the hiring manager is only prioritizing years of experience or all these other factors. The formal education is important, or some sort of education is important, because you need to have that base confidence, before even like going on whatever level you're at. So the confidence level sort of should adjust, right, to what level you're applying for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think my experience of that is that people who understand that foundational sort of, not only the principles and the guidelines and the sort of, you know, all of that stuff you can learn online, but also like the process and how to apply it. Most people who do those two things get really excited about design. I would challenge anybody to learn those two things and go, I'm going to come into a interview super excited, right? And you can see when somebody's just churned off a tick list of like, I did this, then I did that, and then I did this. When you're really solving problems, you come out with really unexpected solutions or ideas for solving the problem. And that is what I think a lot of people would pick up on. Like super junior people or people with very little experience, you can see if they're excited by design. And if they are, half the job is done. You've got somebody who's like running in, ready to go, super experienced, super excited. And I think that's one of the things that showing off your passion for it is a huge advantage, you know.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like that combination of both the passion, but then kind of, I guess, supporting that or underlying it is that really kind of solid foundation in the process. Yeah. And in, because I think, Owen, you mentioned it, and it is something we're seeing more and more of, is just the volume of free content, but who is managing that, who's curating that, who's giving a stamp of approval on that content, I guess. So yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna jump to some questions from the audience now, but just say thank you both so much for your answers and the discussion so far. It's been really, really interesting. So I have a question here from Fernando about transitioning to UX, and they are wondering, is it better to list your past job descriptions or to focus on your portfolio projects? And they've mentioned as well that their transferable skills from previous jobs are not landing them interviews.
I think it's, for me, it's really important to see what you've done previously, because it gives you an insight into your unique sort of position or perspective is always going to be super interesting. Now, if you worked in Eddie Rockets for 4 years, I mean, you could post rationalize how that's important to somebody, like if you worked in retail, like there are ways to sort of start talking about how that really informs your view on design. I wouldn't hide it. I think it's important to paint a picture of who you are and what you do. I would just make sure you're addressing it with the person hiring as being this adds to my perspective and my experience, rather than sort of saying, because I worked at like 80 Rockets, I now know how to do UX design. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
I've been actually a really nice anecdote. I've been on a hiring team recently, and one of the applicants was a PhD student. So very accomplished, academically gifted, has done a lot of things. And they were close. They made it to the final round. But in the end, we didn't pick them because it was just, there was no evidence of whether or not they could bridge research to the next phase. And the role we were hiring for is this product UX designer role. It's important. I would say the portfolio is all the more important when you don't have any experience within the field that you want to go to. Relying on just your CV alone, it's just, you're going up against thousands of applicants. Why sell yourself short? And a portfolio doesn't have to be, it's one of the things I hate the most, but it doesn't have to be this horrible thing. And if you're serious about a career in UX, it's a worthy investment. You should put your time into it and just figure out a way to put what you can deliver onto paper for people to see.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, one of the most important things that you can call out in your portfolio is back to that thing of what did talking to users or understanding user need teach you about the problem you were solving? Not how beautiful the interface looked. That is going to be important at some stage. Not how shiny you can make it, or whatever it is, right? It's what unique problem did you arrive at? And that's the most important thing I would say for folks is if you're skimming through thousands of CVs and they're all templates, a lot of them are templates now. Everybody has these really elaborate templates for CVs. They don't do anything for me. What I'm looking for is somebody's hair caught on fire because they were so excited about the idea they came up with, right? And and that sort of passion, as I was saying, comes through whether you have an amazingly designed template or whether you just have a Word doc with a couple of screenshots in it,
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because obviously, we could say that the best kind of experience is probably professional experience for a company that you're working for. But I think to your point around passion, I've reviewed portfolios and CVs where someone has been so passionate that they've gone out and done research and design and gotten feedback on apps that just exist out there, and worked on fictitious projects to build out that portfolio. And while that might not show me real world or in a business environment experience, what it does show me is a total commitment to the craft, a total commitment to producing the best they can with what they have. And I think sometimes those are actually stronger applications than maybe, somebody who has experience but put in less effort to their portfolio.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's like, and as well, just be transparent, I would say, about self-generated work. Like if you're creating a piece of work for yourself to show off your skills, be transparent about it. Like I'm super excited about design, and here's how I would do this differently. And like, it doesn't matter what the problem is. It doesn't matter what the app is. Like, it doesn't matter what the website, it doesn't matter what it is. You could be designing a new cardboard box for all we care. It's like, how did you take what you knew, you learned, and turn it into something really mind-bendingly good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I have a question here for you specifically, Alexis, which is another architect looking to transition to UX. And they're saying that they find the theory of design thinking quite similar between the two fields. So they almost have the opposite problem of which transferable skills should they focus on, which are the most important ones to take you from architecture into UX.
I think architects specifically have an advantage in this particular transition because, as you said, the design process is similar, right? The phases, if you think about registering to be a professional architect, we have to do a logbook. Literally, the phases are similar. You're just changing the scale, you're changing the medium, you're changing the material. The thing that I find actually that holds architects back is that they're maybe a little bit too proud about the architectural profession. And that's the number one thing you have to shed because you are moving out of it. So to someone in tech, they have no idea what architecture is. They don't know that we've worked 80-hour work weeks. They don't care that we know 10 different 3D rendering tools. Nobody cares. So look at it and think about it from try to be a bit humble. What is it that I don't know? And what is it that I do know? You can almost do a stock check because it's so similar, right? So if you go through a design thinking process and you think this is really familiar, dig a level deeper. What I find even today is that I'm still learning things. Nothing is, I don't claim to be an expert in any area. I'm still learning in every single part of the UX design process. So I would say that you have a distinct advantage because you understand design, you understand different things, and you probably have some sort of taste because you have worked in an industry that relies a lot on taste. So take that, well done, pat on the back, but you're now transitioning, start from scratch again, be really methodical. What am I missing? What am I good at? And in the areas where you're missing, be transparent about that. And the areas that you're good at, you can just list that out, and that's your distinct advantage, right? So that's a little thing that I don't think people talk about enough, but I've seen it hold a lot of architects back in getting that first job.
Okay, that's great insight. And I think it actually ties in with another question I had spotted where someone's asking, do employers understand how somebody with a background in social sciences has a lot of transferable skills? And kind of to your point, no, they don't. If they're not a social scientist, they won't. So spell these things out, tell me why your background in whatever it is suits this skill set that I'm looking to hire for, and make the job as easy as possible for the person reviewing, because as hiring people, we care about design and the effort and how easy the experience is of reviewing a portfolio matters. So look, we're just about up for time. So I will finish up by just saying thank you both so much for your time this evening, for all the insights and for answering all the questions. I think we've covered everything, but if either of you have any last words of wisdom for our audience, now is your moment. Otherwise, we will finish up because you've given us so much to think about. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it, Rachel. And it's just such a pleasure to and such an honor to be even in the same room as Alexis as well. Like, just a really amazing designers, and so yeah, thanks for the opportunity to do this talk. Yeah.
Likewise, thank you, Owen. Very high praise, not deserved, but I will take it. I will take it. No, I think that if anything, the final parting words to everyone is that think about why you want to switch. Like really spend some time there. Don't jump into UX just because it's being hyped up. Be really clear and intentional about why you want to pivot into a different place and what you hope to get.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much again, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their evening. Thanks so much, guys.
See you, folks.
Bye.